The rain in Accra came down in torrents, thick and relentless, pounding against corrugated rooftops and turning the busy market streets into streams of mud. Nathan Cole stood near a rusted light pole just off Makola Market, soaked through to the skin. His wallet had been stolen barely 15 minutes earlier, snatched from his back pocket in the chaos of a jostling crowd. Now he had no cash, no ID, and no clue where the sailor lodge was anymore. The shipping crew had disbanded temporarily for a 2-day stop, and his phone, dead and water-drenched, was of no use. He wasn't just stranded in a foreign country. He was tired, embarrassed, and increasingly angry. His sailor's uniform clung to his back, and the salty sweat of the day mixed with the cold rain rolling down his face. He ducked into a side street, hoping to find shelter, anywhere dry where he could think and regroup. His eyes caught a faint glow through a misted glass window ahead, where a flickering sign read Eliana's Haven, Children's Boutique. The place looked small but open. He hesitated for only a second before pushing the door open with his wet shoulder. Inside, warmth. The smell of freshly steamed fabric and lemon-scented soap drifted toward him. The boutique was lined with tiny mannequins in handmade dresses, a rack of toddler shoes, and low shelves packed with children's books. A soft-spoken woman behind the counter raised her eyes, her hands still working at a sewing machine. She was dark-skinned with a calm face, wrapped in a simple headscarf, her eyes unreadable but not unfriendly. She didn't ask too many questions. She looked at him, glanced at his soaked shirt, and simply said, "You can sit there. I'll get you something warm." Nathan was stunned by the gesture. For the next 10 minutes, he sat on a low bench near the counter while she disappeared into a back room, returning with ginger tea and a clean, dry cotton shirt folded neatly. He wanted to explain himself, but he had no idea where to begin. Something about her presence quieted him. She wasn't afraid of his silence. She wasn't trying to impress him. She just moved, gently, efficiently, like someone who had carried her own storms before. And in that strange little boutique, under the yellow bulb light and the sound of soft rain outside, something unspoken passed between them. Eliana wasn't the kind of woman who usually entertained strangers, especially drenched men who wandered in from the streets. But there was something disarmed about Nathan, something honest in the way he sat hunched, trying to preserve his dignity even while water dripped from his elbows onto her floor. She brought him tea without sugar. She had run out, and offered the shirt her brother had left behind last Christmas. He thanked her with a soft voice that didn't match his size or the stories his eyes seemed to hold. For the next hour, she worked on her sewing while he sat nearby, sipping slowly, watching the way her fingers moved through the fabric with grace and purpose. Occasionally, they spoke. She told him the shop had been her mother's before her. He shared that he was a sailor from Lagos, only in Accra for a short contract. Their conversation wasn't smooth. It paused often, filled with long stretches of silence. But it never felt awkward. Somehow, the pauses allowed their hearts to fill in more than words could. As the evening drew closer and the rain softened into a drizzle, Eliana lit a candle on the front table. The power had flickered out, as usual. Nathan stood and helped her lift a box of unsorted baby clothes from the back corner. She laughed when he sneezed from the dust, and for the first time that day, he felt human again. When the shop closed, she offered him dinner, simple rice and stew, which they ate on the porch behind the boutique. The night didn't end with plans or expectations. It unfolded slowly, the air thick with a kind of gratitude that neither could name. When he finally asked if he could stay just for the night, she looked at him with steady eyes, weighed his spirit, and nodded. There was no hotel left to walk to, and something told her she wouldn't regret it. That night, on a modest mattress behind the boutique curtain, no words were spoken. Just warmth, shared breath, and a moment that neither of them expected. For Eliana, it wasn't desperation. It wasn't foolishness. It was a quiet decision. And for Nathan, it wasn't conquest. It was the only time in years he felt seen without being asked to explain who he was. By dawn, the electricity was back, and so was the sound of tires splashing puddles outside. Nathan woke first. He looked at the woman beside him. Her scarf had slipped off, revealing soft coils of natural hair spread across the pillow. Her breathing was slow, peaceful, and steady. For a second, he considered waking her to say goodbye. But the call from his vessel had come in early. They were preparing to move the ship sooner than expected. He didn't want to cause trouble. He didn't want to linger and make things complicated. So, like a man trained to disappear, he left quietly. No note. No number. No explanation. He didn't think it was cruel. He told himself it was practical. His entire life had been motion, docks, coasts, countries, containers. He had never been taught to stay. Eliana woke to find his borrowed shirt neatly folded beside the pillow. No trace of him except the cup he drank from and the creased mattress. Her heart didn't break, but it sank. Not because she didn't expect it, but because a part of her hoped she was wrong about men like him. Still, she didn't chase him. She cleaned up, opened her shop, and said nothing. Life moved. The boutique needed her. Her aunt called to ask about orders. A child came in with his mother needing a birthday outfit. By nightfall, she folded the bedsheet, tied her scarf tighter, and told herself the moment had passed. That evening, she lit a candle and whispered under her breath, "Lord, if there's anything I need to know, reveal it." She didn't realize her prayer would be answered so soon. In the quiet of that humble space, a seed had been planted. Not just in her womb, but in her spirit. And though she didn't know it yet, it would change her life forever. 3 weeks later, Eliana stood in her small bathroom holding a pregnancy test. 2 red lines. Bold. Undeniable. Her hands trembled, and her heart beat so loudly she could hear it over the ticking wall clock. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, the test resting on her knees like some ancient scroll carrying a prophecy. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared, because deep down, part of her already knew. She thought back to that night, not as a mistake, but as a moment of soul and body converging. She wanted to be angry, but no rage came. Only reality. She thought of all the customers who came into her boutique needing first birthday outfits. Now she'd be the one sewing for her own. Alone. Attempts to trace Nathan proved futile. She didn't even have his surname. She remembered only that he said he was from Lagos. She went to the local port one day, hoping to see someone from his crew. But the names had changed, and the officers knew nothing. He was here for a temporary contract, one sailor said, uninterested. After a few days, she stopped searching. Instead, she moved to Kumasi to be closer to her aunt, who offered her a small space to reopen the boutique. Eliana didn't tell her about the pregnancy right away. She didn't tell anyone. When her belly began to show, she said little. And when the twins came, a boy and girl with matching dimples and the eyes of a man who never said goodbye, she named them Noah and Naomi. That name, Nathan, was buried deep in her chest. Not out of bitterness, but out of sacred protection. These children weren't mistakes. They were a story only God could write. And one day, if the time was right, their father would know. Eliana stood over 2 tiny cots in her modest Kumasi room, rocking gently on her heels as both babies stirred in sleep. Noah and Naomi, born just minutes apart, were already full of differences. Noah fidgeted even in his dreams, while Naomi stayed still, her tiny brow sometimes furrowed as if she sensed the world was already heavy. Eliana, now 27, had changed in quiet but permanent ways. Her eyes no longer searched the horizon for answers, and her heart no longer waited for someone to return. She had buried Nathan's memory in the silent middle of her chest, not with hate, but with the stillness of someone who had accepted that silence sometimes was the answer. She ran a modest children's boutique tucked near her aunt's compound, selling baby clothes she sewed by hand. Customers returned often, charmed by her gentle speech and precision. No one asked about the twins' father, and she offered no stories. "I'm their mother," she would say, with a quiet smile that dared no one to question further. The twins grew fast, curious, bright, and beautifully observant. Eliana taught them simple prayers, how to count their steps while walking, how to speak kindly even when tired. Some nights she cried in silence, not from regret but from exhaustion. 2 children, no partner, and the never-ending press of bills. But she never raised her voice at them. She'd look at Noah's cheek, the dimple forming on the right, and be reminded of a face she once knew under the glow of candlelight. Naomi's almond-shaped eyes mirrored those of the man who left before dawn. Eliana would often pause while feeding them and whisper, "You will never be defined by absence." She poured everything she had into their wholeness. She didn't need the world's pity. She didn't need Nathan to show up anymore. Or so she believed. Life had wrapped itself around her quietly and completely, until the very thought of that night in Accra had become just a distant page in a long book she never planned to reopen. Back in Lagos, Nathan Cole sat on the edge of his waterfront apartment, watching the restless tide pull against the pier. It had been a good 5 years. Professionally, at least. He had climbed the ranks as one of the most reliable sailors under Atlantic Freight West. His name meant something at the ports. He had money now, an apartment that didn't leak when it rained, and a quiet routine that kept him from thinking too much. But there were nights he couldn't ignore the hollowness. Nights when the faces of women he met in passing never stayed. Nights when laughter from neighboring families spilled through thin walls and reminded him of something he didn't even know he missed. He had never been a man of regrets, but something about that one evening in Accra, 5 years ago, never stopped haunting him. It wasn't just about Eliana. It was the way she made silence feel safe, the way her presence didn't demand anything of him, yet made him feel like he owed her more than he gave. One evening, after returning from a sail through Takoradi, Nathan wandered into a quiet art shop in Lagos. While browsing, he paused in front of a canvas sketch of a market corner in Accra, with a large mango tree bending over a street sign. Something shifted in his chest. He bought the piece, took it home, and stared at it for hours. The next morning, he called in a favor at his shipping office. A new route was forming. Ghana again. This time he asked for a short break in between cargo processing. Just 2 or 3 days off, he said casually, masking the urgency in his voice. He had no address, no surname. Just memory, soft and faded like old fabric. But something in him knew he had to try. Not to chase a fantasy. Not to claim anything. But to at least ask a question he should have asked 5 years ago. What if I had stayed? That question echoed in his mind louder than the waves that once gave him purpose. It took Nathan almost 2 days of wandering through Accra to finally find the alley. He walked from one end of the market to another, asking in subtle tones if anyone remembered a children's boutique run by a calm woman with a quiet voice. Most shook their heads. Some pointed vaguely. But he remembered the mango tree. It had towered at the edge of a sloping gutter, its branches bent with age, dropping leaves like blessings. On the third morning of his search, drenched in sweat and dust, he spotted the tree, and next to it, a small, weather-worn sign, Eliana's Haven, Children's Boutique. His heart didn't race. It dropped. The lettering had faded, the paint peeling, but it was unmistakable. He stood in front of it, not moving, not blinking. Behind the glass, a figure rearranged baby clothes. She moved slowly, methodically. Eliana. Still graceful. Still whole. He stepped forward, hand on the door, pausing for breath. When he entered, a bell chimed softly. Eliana looked up. Her eyes widened for a split second, like a gasp without sound. Then, as if time hadn't passed at all, she nodded and said, "You found it." Nathan exhaled, unsure what he expected. He smiled gently. "I did." They didn't rush to hug. There was no cinematic reunion. Just stillness, and the heavy air between two people who both knew that silence had never meant closure. She offered him a seat again. Ginger tea, again. They spoke about the weather. His shipping routes. Her growing business. She asked no questions. He gave no explanations. And yet, everything unsaid hovered between them like breath on glass. On the floor nearby, 2 small children drew pictures with crayons. A boy and a girl. Nathan glanced at them briefly but made no connection. Their laughter filled the boutique gently. But his focus was on Eliana's steady eyes, which, for the first time, seemed to carry something just beyond his reach. The hours passed like water under a bridge, quiet, sure, but never returning in the same form. Nathan and Eliana sat together in the boutique, talking sparingly. She poured tea. He asked if she still used the lemon soap he remembered. She smiled faintly. I never stopped. The boy, Noah, ran to show Eliana a sketch he made of a boat. Uncle, look, he called out toward Nathan, then paused, unsure. Nathan chuckled softly, ruffling the boy's hair with absent affection. Nice boat, he said casually. But when he caught the child's smile, that gap-toothed grin, that dimple, something flickered. Not a conclusion, just a quiet nudge inside him. Still, he said nothing. He watched as the girl, Naomi, hugged her doll, her gaze mirroring his own, deep and searching. It was a strange echo, but he brushed it off as coincidence. As the evening sun stretched through the boutique's front glass, casting long shadows over their conversation, Nathan rose to leave. He reached for his satchel, thanked her again for the tea, and began to say goodbye. But before he could open the door, Eliana's voice stopped him. Firm, almost whispering. "Nathan." He turned. "Yes." She didn't flinch. She simply said, "They're yours." For a moment, the shop stopped breathing. Nathan blinked, the words not fully processing. "I'm sorry." "What?" She stepped closer. "Those two children. Noah and Naomi. They're yours. They always were." Her voice didn't carry accusation. It carried truth. And truth doesn't need to shout. Nathan stood frozen in the middle of the shop, staring at her. Then slowly, his gaze turned back to the children, now giggling over their crayons again. This time, when he looked at them, he truly saw them. And in that moment, everything he had tried to forget came crashing back to claim him. Nathan stood in the middle of Eliana's boutique like someone who had just been told the sea had swallowed his house. Her words hovered in the air with terrifying gentleness. "Those twins, they're yours." He looked at her, then at the children, then back again. Noah was now laughing loudly, waving a crayon-stained paper with squiggles that vaguely resembled a boat. Naomi sat with her legs crossed, her wide brown eyes darting between the two adults. Nathan's chest tightened. His thoughts ran wild. It can't be. It's been 5 years. She never told me. Why now? But none of that could stop the way the boy's smile echoed his own, or how Naomi's posture and stillness mirrored the calm he saw in the mirror on his loneliest nights. He didn't speak. Not immediately. There was too much shame crawling up his throat. Eliana stood firm, her arms by her sides, not angry, not triumphant, just tired, like someone finally setting down a truth too heavy to carry alone. "I didn't come back to disrupt anything," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "I came back because I remembered you. Not because I knew." Eliana nodded slowly. "I know," she said. "But now that you're here, you deserve to know the rest." She didn't offer more explanation. She didn't need to. Nathan walked out moments later, head bowed, feet unsteady, with more than rain in his eyes. Back in his hotel room, he sat for hours in silence. His mind replayed every second of his time in the boutique, Naomi's quiet stare, Noah's playful interruptions, Eliana's restraint. The guilt began to settle like dust in every corner of his body. He didn't leave the next morning. He extended his stay. Something inside him refused to walk away again. This time, he wasn't sailing away with distance as an excuse. This time, something inside him had anchored. That night, Nathan lay flat on his back in the hotel room, unable to sleep. The ceiling above him was pale and cracked, but all he could see were the curves of Noah's smile, the shadows of Naomi's cheekbones, the unspoken fury in Eliana's stillness. "I have children." The realization came in waves, not with joy, not yet, but with a kind of disbelief that hurt. He had missed 5 birthdays, 5 first steps, 5 Christmas mornings. He didn't even know what foods they liked or what scared them at night. He had been so focused on his own path, so disciplined in avoiding emotional roots, that he hadn't considered what his departure had left behind. Now, the weight of those missing years pressed on his chest like a tide refusing to retreat. He rose from the bed and sat at the small writing desk, turning on the lamp. He picked up a hotel notepad and began scribbling. First, their names. Noah. Naomi. Then, his name, Nathan. Then again, Naomi. Noah. His own handwriting betrayed the trembling in his hands. He didn't blame Eliana for not telling him. Not anymore. As he remembered the morning he left, silently, selfishly, he realized he had given her no way to find him. No number. No promise. Not even a last name. He had treated that night as something temporary, disposable. But she had lived with its consequences every single day. And still, she had raised them. With strength. With dignity. Without ever trying to reach him out of desperation. That realization humbled him more than anything. The next morning, Nathan didn't head for the port. Instead, he returned to the boutique, unsure of what he'd say. He didn't even knock. He stood across the street, watching through the glass as Eliana tied Naomi's braid and helped Noah pick up scattered socks from the floor. There were no nannies, no chaos. Just quiet love and a tired mother doing everything alone. It was the first time in Nathan's life that he realized being present wasn't about making grand gestures. It was about showing up, even when you had nothing to say. Nathan returned later that day and asked Eliana if he could visit the children. not as their father, but as a friend. A stranger even. She watched him for a long moment, the kind that makes a man shift uncomfortably without knowing why. Then she said, "Only if you call yourself Uncle Nate." "Not Daddy. Not now." He nodded, a quiet man taking instructions he knew he had earned. She opened the boutique door and let him inside. Noah was excited to see him again, running up with a cran-streaked face. "Uncle Nate," he chirped, as if it had always been his name. Naomi, quieter, stood back with her doll pressed to her chest, eyes scanning Nathan with cautious curiosity. "Do you want to read with us?" Noah asked eagerly. Nathan knelt, dusted his palms on his trousers, and said, "Only if you teach me how." It was the first time in years he had knelt for anything other than tying a boot. They sat on a mat in the boutique's back corner. Eliana watched, arms folded, every muscle in her body taut with protection. Nathan read with a shaky voice, mispronouncing cartoon character names, fumbling through rhymes, and laughing too hard at Noah's knock-knock jokes. Naomi eventually sat closer, not too close, but close enough to slide her book toward him. "You missed my birthday," she said softly, not accusing, just factual. Nathan didn't respond right away. "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry, sweetheart." She nodded, as if forgiveness wasn't something she could give yet, but the acknowledgement was a start. That evening, as Eliana walked them home, Nathan carried Naomi on his back while Noah danced around them. It was the first time he felt the weight of his past not as punishment, but as a second chance trying to bloom. The days that followed were fragile but warm. Nathan started showing up with small things, books he remembered liking as a boy, toy sailboats, crayons in colors Eliana couldn't afford to restock. But he never brought money. He never insulted her independence. He didn't ask questions like, "What do they eat?" or "What school do they go to?" Instead, he watched, learned, listened. He helped Noah paint cardboard boxes into pirate ships and taught Naomi to whistle between her teeth. When she finally managed to do it after days of trying, her laugh echoed through the shop like music from a forgotten radio. Eliana sat in the corner that afternoon and watched as her daughter looked up at a man she once thought she'd never see again. There was a quiet ache in her chest, the kind you feel when something beautiful begins to grow in the same spot where something once died. One evening, after they closed the boutique, Nathan offered to help fold new stock. Eliana hesitated, then handed him a stack of onesies. "You really want to?" she asked. He nodded. "Let me earn the right to be here." As they worked side by side in silence, he asked softly, "Were you angry I left?" She paused. "No," she said. "I was disappointed. But not surprised. I didn't expect a man like you to stay." Her voice wasn't bitter. It was just real. Nathan wanted to ask what kind of man she thought he was now, but he knew better than to rush healing. That night, he walked home alone, carrying Naomi's drawing in his pocket, a picture of him, her, and Noah on a boat. No mother in the frame. Not yet. But maybe, one day, Eliana would feel safe enough to draw herself back into the story. It was a Thursday afternoon when Nathan finally said the words Eliana had been dreading. The boutique had just closed for the day. Naomi was coloring by the display rack, and Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, watching a video Nathan downloaded for them on his phone. Eliana was folding clothes when Nathan's voice cut gently through the quiet. "Eliana, have you ever thought about letting them come to Lagos with me?" She paused, then looked up slowly. "What?" Nathan cleared his throat, trying to make the idea sound practical, loving even. "I mean, just think about it. Private school, access to doctors, everything. They'd have more than this." He gestured to the boutique, but that one motion was all it took to rupture the balance they had built. Eliana's face shifted, not in fury, but in something colder. Disappointment. Hurt disguised as calm. She slowly placed the folded onesie on the counter. "You mean more than the life I gave them? The one I've sacrificed for every single day?" Nathan raised his palms. "That's not what I meant. I mean, you've done more than enough. You've been incredible. But now that I'm here, I can." She cut him off with a quiet, sharp tone. "Now that you're here, you want to relocate them? To give them a better life?" "Nathan, they don't need better. They need stable. Present. Loved. I raised them to feel enough. And now you're telling me they're not." Naomi looked up at them, sensing the tension. Eliana reached for her hand without breaking eye contact with Nathan. This is not a movie. You don't just show up, discover you're a father, and pack up the children like luggage. Nathan wanted to explain, to backtrack, to say it wasn't about taking them away from her. It was about stepping up. But the damage was done. Eliana's voice dropped to a near whisper. They already have a home. You can be part of it, but you don't get to rewrite it. Nathan stood there, stunned, ashamed. He had confused provision for parenting. And now, he had touched the one wound she still carried open. Eliana didn't shout. She didn't throw him out. She simply walked to the front door and opened it. Her message was clear. Nathan took a few steps, stopped, then turned back. Why are you acting like I'm the villain here? I came back. I'm trying. Is that not enough? Her laugh was dry, sad. You want a medal for returning? You want gratitude for being 5 years too late? Her voice was still soft, but every syllable felt like fire. Nathan, do you even know Naomi's favorite color? Do you know which knee Noah scraped last week? You think presence is the same as consistency. It's not. She didn't wait for his reply. She walked back to the children, kissed the top of their heads, and went to her sewing machine. Nathan stood at the threshold, his breath stuck somewhere between his ribs. For the first time since returning to Ghana, he felt completely out of place. And it stung more than rejection. It felt like loss. Because this wasn't about winning an argument. This was about finally being told the full cost of absence. The next few days were colder than anything he had felt out at sea. Eliana didn't pick up his calls. She didn't respond to his messages. He passed by the boutique one evening and saw the closed sign hanging, even though it was well before closing time. The twins were nowhere outside. He stood across the road for almost 30 minutes, hoping Naomi would peek through the window, or Noah would come out with his toy boat. Nothing. The world had gone silent around him, and it was a silence he had created with his own well-intentioned words. He walked back to his rented flat that night, realizing that love wasn't about swooping in and offering solutions. It was about standing still, staying when it's uncomfortable, and knowing that sometimes, what people need isn't your rescue, it's your remorse. And he had shown neither when it counted most. The days that followed felt like walking through fog. Nathan stopped trying to call. He stopped standing across the road. He sat alone in his flat, replaying every word he said, every assumption he made. For years, he had built a life on control, controlling his routes, his timing, his responsibilities. But now, nothing moved when he wanted it to. Not Eliana. Not the twins. Not the ache in his chest. He started writing things down. Not for her. For himself. Pages of guilt, memories, observations. He wrote about Naomi's quiet resilience, Noah's wild laughter, and how Eliana had kept her dignity all these years. Sometimes he would fold the letters and slide them into his backpack, unsure if he'd ever give them to anyone. They weren't apologies. They were acknowledgements. And sometimes, that's the only language a remorseful heart can speak. At the boutique, Eliana carried on like nothing was broken. She served customers. She ironed baby dresses. She packed school lunches. But inside, she was bleeding. She didn't cry in front of the twins, but some nights she would sit on the floor after they slept and stare at the ceiling for hours. The irony was cruel. Nathan was finally here, and yet, she had never felt so alone. She hated that part of her still wanted him to try harder. Still hoped he'd knock on the door, not to take, not to argue, but just to listen. But pride held her hostage. Pain reinforced the walls. And the children? They grew quiet. Naomi asked less. Noah stopped mentioning Uncle Nate. And life, that cruel tide, kept moving forward like it hadn't just collided with everything she had carefully built. It was the last Sunday before Nathan's scheduled departure. He hadn't seen the children in over a week. The boutique still bore no sign of welcome. And every part of him feared that this was how things would end. Again, unfinished. That night, he sat at his tiny desk and wrote a letter addressed to Naomi and Noah. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. Dear Naomi and Noah, I missed your first steps. Your first birthdays. Your first questions about life. But I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere, even when I leave. He poured out his failures, his fears, his regrets. Then he wrote a second letter to Eliana. I didn't come back to own. I came back to offer what I should have from the beginning, my presence. Not my pride. Not my plans. Just me. He folded the letters and tucked them away. He didn't have the courage to deliver them yet. But the next morning, as he stood outside the boutique again, he didn't come with demands or speeches. He came with nothing but himself. The door was unlocked. Eliana was sweeping. Their eyes met, and the weight between them returned. Slowly, without a word, Nathan stepped inside and knelt. Not to beg. Not to manipulate. Just to say, I didn't understand before. I thought giving them a better life meant taking them away. I was wrong. Eliana blinked, her hand tightening around the broom handle. And now? She asked softly. Nathan looked up. Now I just want to be present in the life you've already given them. I'm not here to fix it. I'm here to earn my place in it. Her chest rose and fell. There were no hugs. No smiles. But she let him sit. She let him stay. And sometimes, forgiveness begins not with words, but with space. It took Eliana 3 days to speak again after Nathan knelt in her boutique and finally said the word she had needed to hear. Not I love you. Not please forgive me. Just I didn't understand. Those words, free of ego or demand, were what opened the small door she had long kept locked. On the third evening, after the twins had gone to bed and the street was quiet, she placed a folded blanket and a cup of tea on the front table. Nathan was already seated there, as he had been the past few nights, waiting, never pushing. If you're going to be in their lives, she said without looking at him, you do it my way. No gifts to buy their love. No promises you can't keep. And no talk of Lagos. He nodded. He didn't smile. He didn't rush to thank her. He simply said, all right. I'll be here tomorrow. Just like today. And so began their routine. Nathan started showing up each morning after his doc assignments. He helped with school runs, wrapped lunch packs, waited outside the boutique with Noah when Naomi had headaches. He didn't try to charm Eliana or talk his way into her world. He just kept showing up, broom in hand, chalk on his trousers, questions ready for their spelling tests. The twins began to laugh again. Real, full belly laughter. Naomi would whisper good night, Uncle Nate, as he left in the evenings, and Noah started drawing him in pictures where his stick figure stood between them. Sometimes Nathan would sit on the floor, watching them color, and quietly tear up, not out of guilt, but because he was finally learning what it meant to be allowed into someone's life again. Not because of blood. Not because of regret. But because they chose to trust him again. Slowly. The last day before Nathan's return to Lagos came too fast. He hadn't told the twins yet, not because he planned to disappear again, but because even the thought of goodbye made his throat tighten. Eliana knew. She always knew. That morning, she packed an extra snack for him in Naomi's lunch bag and didn't say a word. Nathan walked the kids to school as usual, crouching beside them before they ran in. You'll still be here tomorrow, right? Naomi asked, her small fingers pressing against his wrist. I'll always be here, baby girl, he whispered, choosing truth over specifics. That evening, as they all sat on the boutique floor finishing up a puzzle, Eliana stood from the corner and walked toward him with something in her hand. It was a folded piece of fabric, one of the matching Accra shirts she had sewn for Noah's birthday. This one, in adult size. For when you come back, she said. No softness in her voice, but no bitterness either. Just acknowledgement. Just trust. Later that night, as the twins dozed off in the back room, Nathan stood in the dark corner of the boutique and finally cried. He wept not because he was leaving, but because he was afraid he'd lose what had only just begun. Eliana walked in and saw him wiping his face. She didn't ask. She didn't console. She simply walked over, placed Naomi's latest drawing, a picture of him holding their hands, in his palm, and whispered, "We saw your effort." Those words meant more than forgiveness. They meant he had mattered. Nathan held her gaze for a moment and then looked down. "Thank you," he said. "I'll be back soon." She nodded, but said nothing more. As he left the boutique that night, he knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, but only if he honored the space they had made for him with more than visits. He had to come back. Not to start over, but to continue, this time, as a father. Back in Lagos, Nathan's apartment felt like a quiet echo chamber. No Naomi asking strange questions at breakfast. No Noah shouting from under the table. No Eliana in the background humming softly as she counted stock or braided Naomi's hair. For the first few days, he busied himself with port work, deliveries, and backlogged reports. But every evening, when the sky darkened and the sea quieted, he found himself reaching for the cloth Eliana had sewn for him or rereading the hotel notepad filled with scribbles from Kumasi. Then, one Thursday afternoon, a parcel arrived at the port. Inside were 2 envelopes, each addressed in unsteady handwriting. The first was from Naomi, a carefully folded drawing of a boat with 3 stick figures and the words, "Come back soon, Daddy." The second was from Noah, who wrote, "I learned to tie my shoelaces. Eliana said you didn't know how when you were my age." Nathan chuckled through tears. The letters weren't long. They weren't polished. But they made something in him anchor for the first time. That night, he framed both drawings and placed them on the wall across from his bed. He called no one. He went nowhere. He simply sat there, watching the wall, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, groundedness. These weren't just children. They were reflections of a life that could have been lost if not for grace. And Eliana. She was more than the mother of his children. She was the keeper of a fire he almost let die. He didn't know if she would ever love him again. But that wasn't his mission anymore. He was done chasing things for himself. Now, he would build, in patience, in silence, in consistency. For them. And slowly, in the place where absence once lived, presence began to grow roots. 3 months later, Nathan arrived quietly in Kumasi on a humid Friday afternoon. No announcements. No surprises. He texted Eliana, "I'm here. No rush. Just let me know when I can come." She didn't respond immediately. The next morning, he got her reply, "Parents' Day at 9 a.m. They'll be glad to see you." That next day, Nathan stood at the back of the school hall in a neat white shirt and the Accra top she had sewn. When Noah spotted him, he waved so hard his drawing paper flew out of his hand. Naomi ran straight into his arms without hesitation. Eliana watched from a corner near the doorway, arms folded, face unreadable, but her eyes softer than they'd been in years. Nathan didn't rush over. He stayed with the twins, sat on the mat between them, helped them with their art project, and never once looked over his shoulder to see if she was watching. At the end of the event, the teacher called the children to collect a certificate of participation. When Naomi's name was read, she dragged Nathan with her to the stage. He stood beside her awkwardly, but she smiled proudly. "This is my daddy," she said into the microphone. The room didn't clap loudly. There was no music swelling. Just a stillness. A recognition. A return. Eliana stood a few meters away and nodded, not as an invitation, but as a quiet acknowledgement. "You've become who you should have been all along." Nathan didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, holding Naomi's hand, watching Noah bounce beside them, and breathing in the kind of peace that only comes when redemption is no longer about fixing the past, but fully showing up in the present. Please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.